Hey everyone, it's Lisa Listen, and I am here with Jen Baldwin from Findmypast today. We are here to talk more about, I should say, our summer road trip that we have going through the U.S. records at Findmypast. So if this is our first time meeting, I'm Lisa Listen with Are You My Cousin? And Jen, introduce yourself there.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Lisa. I'm Jen Baldwin. I'm with Findmypast. I am the content acquisition manager for North America. So I specialize in North American records and research across the United States and Canada, but also how to connect that back to the British Isles and where so many of us came from.
That's true. You have the coolest job, I think. I love your job.
Thanks. I do consider myself quite lucky.
Yeah. But it is, I like what you said about you're connecting the records back to the UK, where many of us, many folks in the US definitely their ancestors immigrated from, and definitely mine did as well. So welcome everybody. So glad that you have found us today. And if you've been with us a couple of weeks ago, we did a Facebook Live stream on records at Findmypast from Cincinnati. So if you didn't get a chance to see that, definitely head back over and find those, or you can find them on my site at lisalisten.com. And we are now on our second tour, which is in New York City, the Big Apple. And I don't know about you, Jen, but I get a ton of questions about New York and New York City research from my readers.
All the time. Yeah, 100%. New York is a difficult place to research for sure.
It is absolutely complicated, as we find out, but it is one but it's fun too to be able to see those. I don't personally have New York City ancestors. My husband did, and I love being able to go up there and literally walk in the footsteps of his ancestors. It is just, sometimes we don't even realize. We come home and I'll do some research and we're like, oh, you know what? We just walked right down that street. We walked right past where they used to live, kind of thing. So, we've got lots of folks showing up over there, coming in. Hey, Christine, and hey, Bridget, good to see you again, and Carolyn and Susan, wonderful. So, Susan's getting major thunderstorms in Ontario. We get those here too.
So this doesn't look like it is playing on the Findmypast page. So you keep talking. I am going to try and see if I can fix that really quick.
Sure. So, we are live, and you can always tell because we have technical difficulties, but this time I have somebody with me who can actually take care of them for us. So, but we're having a lot of fun with the summer road trip theming that we've been doing. So this is something, if you haven't seen this before, Findmypast and I have been joining together, and we're really looking at each of 4 cities. We're looking at the records that you can find at Findmypast that are US based, that will really help with research. I've been amazed. I'm uncovering things, and I'm in Findmypast a lot, quite frankly, and I keep uncovering new databases that I didn't know existed that would be helpful to me. Jen and I were just talking before we started live, and I said, Jen, you put in one there that I totally forgot was there. I need to go because it covers my ancestors when they immigrated from England or from London over to the US or to America. So I'm super excited about that. And I hope others are as well. So how are we doing over there, Jen? Are we playing yet?
I think so. I'm just getting, yeah, okay, we're good. Yes,
we're good?
It says we're good. So I actually just shared it from your page to ours, so I think we're okay.
Oh, okay, great. Because we want to see people, yay!
Yeah, that's right. The more the merrier. So as we go through the next hour or so with everybody, feel free to say hello. Let us know where you're at. Some of you already are. It's always good to hear from people, but also feel free to ask questions and leave comments. We will do our best to read through those and address those as we go through the material together. So, this is really designed to be a conversation and a dialogue, not just Lisa and I talking.
Yep, definitely. So listen, we've got people from all over. John has actually was born in New Jersey and has relatives and grandparents all in New York City. So that's really fantastic. You're in the right place today, definitely. So yeah, we got lots of folks coming in. All right. So Jen, do we want to go ahead and jump right into the slides?
Yep, let me do that. Okay, let me get this going here. I know it doesn't look so good right now. Okay, all right. How's that
All right.
look, Lisa? Are we good?
We are good. You've got it looking good. So again,
Excellent.
yeah, if you don't mind just going ahead and advancing another slide, because there we go. So we are talking about New York ancestors. And a lot of our focus for this week and next week is on New York City ancestors, but you really can't not talk about New York State records as well in some of the differences. So we'll kind of be covering a little bit of both with that. So Jen, if we could have the next slide. Yep. So we're in a second stop here. And what I would say is that when it comes to looking at the birth, marriage, and death records for New York City, let's just say it's complicated right off the bat.
Yeah.
This one took me a while, guys, because I had not had as much experience as probably some of you have. So it's very important that when we're looking at New York City to understand that they were a different entity when it came to birth, marriage, and death records than New York State. So you've got two separate systems basically going. And right. Oh, go ahead, Jen.
I was just gonna. It's actually, as far as I know, at least, and I looked this up recently just to make sure I was right about this. It's the only state in the U.S. that has this situation where you have a state system and then a completely different vital record system for a large municipality like this. So, as far as I'm aware, at least, and if you're out there and you know I'm wrong, correct me. But New York City and New York State have this very unique relationship where their vital record systems are completely separate organizational systems, and it's the only place like that in the United States.
Yeah, it's the only place I've seen, the only state that I've seen it in as well. And it, like I said, it does get very complicated, but just kind of to give you an overview of things. So when it comes to birth records, okay, New York State started keeping an index of birth records in 1881. Their indices for marriages start in 1880, as well as death. Actually, death might be 1881. I can't remember. I think I got that one wrong. But so we're looking at early, 1880, 1881, early 1880s for those state registrations in indices. And so they're there. That's for the state. But New York City actually goes back a lot earlier for some of their records. And I put a little asterisk. So I have New York City at 1847. But you got to remember, New York City is made up of 5 boroughs and basically 5 counties. And each one had a different time period on it. So it's really important when you're researching to understand the differences that Manhattan started their birth registrations in 1847, but Brooklyn started in 1866. So it's really important that you understand the areas where your ancestor lived. Location is extremely important when it comes to finding these, as well as the time period. So I think what I would say is make sure that you do your front end research first, so that you know where that record should be. And if it's not there, check the next borough over. Check the next lawn, guys.
Right. I always I find it interesting. I included that little bit about the recording all the deeds in the county clerks in 1830. I always find it really interesting that they actually mandated deeds well before they mandated the vital records. And that's not unusual necessarily, because of course land and property was it's all about the money, right? You follow the money. But if you're really struggling with those vital events, you need to go to other record categories, and land records is one of the options, because they did start considerably earlier than all the other vital records.
That's a really good point. It's a good strategy to use, not only in New York, but also in other states as well, for that kind of thing. So definitely. And it does get really confusing as to what is available when on dates. So like the indices for these birth, marriage, and deaths can go well into the 1900s, I think it is. And they make them available, say, I think it was 75 years after the birth, 50 years after marriage and death. But after about 1913, I think is when they started with their actual like birth certificates type thing. Then it's like 125 years for these more recent, when the birth indices leave off and they go to more certificates, then that's when you're looking at 125 years post the event happening, and 75 for death and marriage. So again, there you've got, if you're looking for, fairly recent generations, you may not be able to get those vital records. They have a really tight privacy law going on
And
there.
their access laws change all the time, actually. The most recent change, I think, was 2 years ago, about 2.5 years ago, somewhere's in that window, where the New York City was making adjustments to access of vital records and who could acquire copies and all of that. So it's a it's not an issue that has ended, right? It's still very much in discussion across the region. Yeah.
Yes, definitely. So when in doubt, just reach out to I'd go to the website of whatever office has those records that you're looking for, to see what their current availability is for those types of records. So yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
All right, let you head on to the next slide. Oh, here's my beautiful map. I put the map in because Jen loves maps, but so do I.
I do.
Beautiful, colorful map of a New York area. So pop on over to the next slide, and I'll share about I was going to say my ancestors, but these are my husband's ancestors. But I'm
close enough.
Close enough. So this is Abraham and Minnie Jacobs, and Abraham was born in London. Minnie was born in Russia, and they married in New York City. So they immigrated over separately, and they did get married. Now, this is actually their passport application that I found, and it gave some really wonderful information. First of all, it gave me their photographs. So that was something I wanted. But it told me something very important. It told me that they were traveling. They had means to travel. And this was in the 1920s. And it told me that they had planned a trip over to London and Germany and France, but they were primarily going to London. So hop over to the next slide, Jen. Perfect. They traveled, and then they also returned back home. So what this is a list of passengers leaving the UK from 1890 to 1960. So this is 1921. They are leaving the UK, and they are actually on this. So they've already traveled. They've done their travel. They're heading back home. And if you will go to the next slide, Jen, I can show a close-up. So this is a close-up of the slide, and you can see that they are in there. They're about halfway down. I keep wanting my cursor, but I don't have a cursor. I don't have cursor. Thank you. Thank you. There it is. I was like, where is it? They're there. Now, here's what was so absolutely wonderful. So I knew they went to the UK. I knew they'd probably gone to London because he was born there. But what I didn't expect was this. In the circle up there, that's the last residence they were in when they were in the UK. The last place they stayed when they were in the UK. And it was 242 High Street in the Shadwell area. That's a part of London. Guys, I have a street address for where they stayed. And I'm like, why? And of course, my brain is going a mile a minute thinking in my head, why? What was it about? What's there? So I went to the next slide, Jen. I went to the next. Yep. Oh, sorry. So since the 1921 census is not out yet, it'll come out sometime in 2022, correct, Jen?
Early 2022.
Early. Yep. Yay, can't wait. So I went on back. I took a chance and went back to the 1911 census record to see who lived in that street. Because, guys, here's a tip. You can search by street address on these census records over there for the UK. And so that's exactly what I did. In fact, I think you guys did a blog post on that recently.
We did, yeah.
Which is really cool. So I put in the street name, and I found the family that lived there. It was the Davis, and I cannot say this correctly, Wolfwich. I can't say it, Wolfwich family. And Davis was the father of this family. He was a boot manufacturer. Well, guess what? Abraham Jacobs was a shoemaker, as well as his father before him. And I was thrilled. So I knew the area of London. I have an address where he went. I happened to know where Abraham had lived in London earlier. So everything was just kind of dovetailing of, this is probably his family. Why would you go see somebody? And so a little more digging, and this is a family that intermarried with the Jacobs family. And I'm still trying to, sort a little bit of some of the details out. I literally just found this last week and was thrilled to find it. But I do know that Abraham's niece married one of Davis's daughters. So there was obviously a family connection. They knew each other. And so I'm going to continue to dig into the records there and find out a little bit more. I mean, I just was thrilled to realize that. And Jen, I think the big thing for me is to recognize, again, we're always trying to find our ancestors in the records, but really understanding why they did what they did. They traveled.
Absolutely.
And if they traveled, they would have generated records.
There's so much that is exciting to me about this story, Lisa. I will now put you on the list of people who are counting down the days until the 1921 census is released, right?
Absolutely, absolutely.
Only on Findmypast. We're super excited about that. And of course, it will be the largest census for England and Wales ever released, probably in our lifetimes. So it's a big deal, and we're super excited. But you also got to use the new address search on our UK census records, which is also really exciting. So, for me, I would automatically be going to Google Maps and Google Earth to zoom in on that address and see what it looks like today, and finding historic photographs and all the maps and gazetteers and everything else that's available. What a cool story you've uncovered.
Oh, yeah, I'm so excited. There's more to that story, and I just can't wait to find out what it is.
Well, you're going to have to write a blog post so that we can all
of course
follow along. Yeah, what a fun find. Cool. So let's move into just a little bit of kind of general must-have information, I guess, for New York research. And just like last time, for those of you who have watched Lisa and I before, we'll probably go back and forth between the two of us. But Lisa's gonna, I hope, watch comments for me a little bit, because my screen is filled up. But again, feel free to leave questions or comments as we go. One of the things that I particularly appreciate about New York as a state for genealogy is that every municipality is required by law to have a historian. So that could be at the village level, all the way up to the county level, and then of course the state. So essentially any kind of geopolitical space has a historian of some nature. And those historians are 100% your allies and friends in your New York research. I have dialogued with a couple of them now over some research that I've done over the last few years, and they are some of the most helpful, friendly people I think I've ever dealt with in the family history space when I'm doing my research. There was one in particular out in Washington County that really dug into some materials for me, went way above and beyond what I had actually asked for. And she wrote me back at one point and said, well, I just think that your story is really interesting, so I want to know the answer, right? They're just as addicted as we are to their locations and their research and the community that they're serving. And that includes all of us who are not actually in the state of New York. So reach out, understand that there is a historian there, and that they're public servants. So they're part of that municipality system, and reach out. Don't be afraid to send that email or make that telephone call, or even just write a letter, right? Depending on your preference. So that's one of the really big things I think that everybody should know about research in New York State. There is, of course, a long history in New York, right? I mean, we talked about the start of vital records being in the late 1880s, which to me is late 1800s, right? But if you really think about it, New York started as a community way back in the early 1600s, right? And of course, it was New Amsterdam first, and it's been controlled by the Dutch and the British and the United States, and it's moved around back and forth. So there's a lot of territorial changes. There's lots of government changes, and it's just like with everybody else, especially in the colonies. It's really, really important to understand that timeline and that history background so that you know where the records are. If you're looking at a period of time that covers a transition from New Amsterdam to New York, from Dutch power to English power, then you need to probably be looking at New York records, but you also need to be looking at records that are in the National Archives in Britain, for example, in England, right? And you also need to be looking at materials in Dutch archives. So there's a lot of different archives and resources that we can utilize and go to, but to know which ones we need, we have to understand that history and that timeline. We talked about vital records, but And we talked about when they were implemented, but it's also important to understand when they were actually habitually kept, right? So that systematic process of keeping vital records didn't actually come into play really statewide until 1913. So even what is that, 30 years after it was supposed to have been implemented, you have this period where they might have been keeping records, but they might have not. So you really have to understand all of that depending on what period of time you're working in. We mentioned already that New York State and New York City keep separate vital records, and they have and they do today. So that's a good one to know. And then we'll talk about this quite a bit. Religious records are really essential in New York history. Religion was key for a number of different important historical events. Just like in many other parts of the United States. But because of that gap of vital records, right, we're talking about at least 250 years or so where there were no vital records being kept by any kind of government, religious records fill in that space. So that's an important one.
Definitely.
So if we look at kind of some of those events, right, some of those historical events that we need to know about, right, there's a lot of key firsts, right, across the colonies, especially that include religion. But even broader than the colonies, we have migration patterns during the Second Great Awakening. That was a big part of interior migration across New York. We have the burned over district and all of that kind of upstate. You have a lot of political restrictions that all kind of fall back to religious record keeping. So, there were times when Catholicism was banned from the colony or the state. And so you may not find Catholic records for that period. And then all of a sudden you see, Catholicism allowed, and suddenly there's a huge onslaught of paperwork. So being aware of those kinds of elements are important. And of course, we know that it was a significant location during the American Revolution. So it was actually a loyalist stronghold during the war. So you're not going to find a lot of American records or patriot records where you will find a number of materials around the loyalist community in New York through that period. There were lots of border disputes and land disputes all the way through from colonial, the first colonial days, all the way through to statehood and beyond, where they were arguing with their neighboring communities whether who had control of this corner of Pennsylvania, and a lot of times New York tried to say it was them. So be aware of that as well, because you might be researching in a bordering state and thinking, yeah, I really need Pennsylvania or really need Canada, and actually the records are in New York or outside of New York, depending on the situation, because of those disputes. And we all think of New York as kind of this major immigration point, and it absolutely was, right? The largest immigration point in the United States over the course of history through Ellis Island. But we also have migration through inland lakes, through the Great Lakes, through all the major rivers that run through that area, across the train system, the rail system, international border crossings, right? You have Canada to the north, and so you have border crossings across from Canada into the United States, and then from Canada into Vermont and straight into New York, and major overland migration routes. So, really well documented migration historically from the New York region into Ohio, Pennsylvania, out to the Midwest. From, you've got the Erie Canal that carried people directly into Minnesota and Michigan. So New York, man, it's a hustling, busy place. And so it really is important to really think about kind of every facet of historical research that you can, because New York has a little piece of all of it.
Yeah. So there were a couple questions in the comments section. So Catherine said, what records for prisoners of war held by British in Manhattan? So can you speak to that a little bit?
I can a little bit. This is actually a point of interest for me currently. I've actually been trying to dig into this in the last couple of weeks, trying to find those. So unfortunately, if there were records kept at all, many of them did not survive. Most did not survive. So there are some very, very limited number of records from the American Revolution held on they're actually through the National Archives at Kew, and we actually have those records on Findmypast. There's a prisoner of war collection on Findmypast, but the vast majority of American prisoners are actually from the later War of 1812. So there's not very many people. There's maybe a handful, like less than 10 people from the period of the Revolution. My understanding of the prisoners of war during the Revolution, most of them were held on prison ships. And the person who was in charge, and I forgive me, I forget his name at the moment, but there was one particular individual who was in charge of that system of holding those prisoners. And he had a very special relationship with the commander of British forces in the American colonies. And that special relationship centered around his wife. So one was married and the other one was not, and the wife was in the middle of those two men. And so the guy who was in charge of the prisons got away with an awful lot because he was sharing his wife essentially with this general. And it was kind of this known unspoken situation. But as a result of that, the prisoners were not well taken care of. They didn't get a lot of resources that they should have gotten. They didn't get food that they should have received. He was just kind of profiting off the back end of this job that he had. And as a result, the records that maybe would have normally been kept, unfortunately, were not kept for the vast majority. So unfortunately, most of those people we'll never know their names because of that situation.
Yeah, she actually knows that her ancestor was at Sugar House Prison, so I think even knowing that the actual prison is probably a big deal, basically.
Yeah, absolutely. There's actually my interest in the Revolutionary period has been growing, and I've been listening to a podcast, The American Revolution, and it's very, very well done. And he actually just did an episode. I just listened to this a couple weeks ago, a whole episode about the prisoner of war system and how it was all maintained. And he actually mentioned Sugar House. It was one of the most significant prisons in New York. So, and actually in America for the war. So, if you're interested in that, I highly recommend you just, if nothing else, just find that one episode on that podcast and listen to that, because it's a really good, gives you a good understanding of what was happening in those prisons.
It sounds interesting. And I remember you mentioned that one to me before, so yeah.
Yeah, personal current favorite, right? Yeah. And any other questions, Lisa?
No, June had said check Vermont for New York State records.
Yeah,
as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Yep, definitely. And then lastly, we just want to mention that there was a fire. Of course, there's a fire. The Albany Capitol fire in 1911 destroyed or damaged a large part of the New York State Library, which was the state archives at that time. So if you're doing research in New York State, just like with any other area that has a major fire, you need to understand what was lost in that event in particular. And to do that, I actually was able to identify a really great resource. There was an article written by Harry Macy Jr. that was originally published in the NYGNB newsletter, which is now The Researcher. This article is from 1999, but it has been republished on the New York Genealogical and Biographical Society website as a standalone research guide. So that's what you're looking at. So if you're a member of the NYGNB, you can go into their resources, their research guides online on their website and pull this up. So it's the 1911 State Library fire and its effect on New York genealogy. If you are not a member, it's also available on Findmypast. We do publish The Researcher, so you can get the original article from 1999 from Findmypast. So you have actually two ways to access this particular article, but it's very thorough and it gives a very good description of what was lost in the fire, so we all can be well prepared in our research.
That's great. Somebody was asking about the podcast title. It was just The American Revolution, correct?
Mm-hmm. That's right.
Yeah.
Yep.
I don't have the I can't pop it in chat for some reason the way today. I don't have a chat box, but I can see everything. I just can't actually type.
Yeah. Let's see. I can actually, by the time we're done, I should be able to actually pull up the actual episode, but I will talk and try to do that at the same time.
Okay.
See exactly how talented I am, everybody.
Yeah, and those of you who are asking about the Catholic records, sit tight, because we are going to talk about those. And then if it doesn't answer your question, we'll be happy to. Make sure we get that answered.
Absolutely. Yeah, we will definitely refer to the Catholic records. So for the podcast, if you wanted to find just that particular episode about the prison ships, the website is blog.amrevpodcast.com, AMREV, American Revolution Podcast.com. And from there, you can search all the different topics and keywords and find that prisoner of war article or episode. So hopefully that is helpful to everybody, but we'll also throw it in the chat once I'm able to get into the chat because I can't see it right now. All right, Lisa, let's talk about the New York Census. We kind of covered, we want to cover the foundations of genealogy for all of our stops on our road trip this summer. So just to give everybody kind of the basic understanding, right? New York was the 11th state to join the Union, joined in 1788. So as a result, it's been included in all the federal censuses starting in 1790. And then they had a series of state censuses that they conducted. Unfortunately, most of them are not complete. So you see the list on the screen. In 1855-65, there are counties missing. In 1875 and 1892, some counties have been, 1875, they only did select counties. In 1892, some counties have been lost. And then in 1905, they only have limited counties available. And the language is different here because some are known for sure. Like we know in 1855 and 65, there are missing counties and they have never been recovered, or they have been kind of, they're MIA, right? To use a term from our military friends, they're missing in action. We don't know if they're going to ever show up again. In 1892, we know that some of the records were destroyed, and so they're gone forever, right? So that's why there's nuances in this language here. In 1915 and 1925, all counties survive and are available for research. But also, an important factor, those federal census, we didn't really talk about this last time with Cincinnati, but always important to think about the non-population schedules as well. So there are population schedules around veterans, mortality censuses, industry census, agriculture, pensioners, and social statistics that are all included at various timeframes in the federal census. And those can be extremely valuable, especially for people who are in manufacturing roles. I'm thinking about your shoemakers, Lisa.
My shoemakers,
right? But in Cincinnati, I have a family of cast iron workers, right? They own foundries, and so I've used the manufacturing census to understand what they were doing and their wealth and their history. So, and then we have replacement schedules like the 1890 veterans schedule for Civil War veterans. Those are all really, really important schedules as well. So don't overlook those.
Yeah, and I just want to point out, with the state census and the counties missing, or some only select counties were used, that it's important to know that up front in your research. Make sure you really, because sometimes we might be researching and we don't see them. And I think researchers it's easy to make that incorrect assumption that, oh, they must have left and come back, or they're not there. And there's so many holes in some of these records that it's important to understand that that's actually may not be true, that make sure it's not a case of the record missing as opposed to your ancestor missing.
Right. Yeah. Very, very important distinction. 100%. And I just realized I have a typo in my little bubble off to the side. So just pretend my typo's not there. Funny. And then, we're going through a lot of material today. New York is as we started with, it's a very complicated state to research. And so I cannot recommend enough the New York Family History Research Guide and Gazetteer. It's published by the New York Geological and Biographical Society. And I have had this publication now since the first issue was published a couple of years ago. It is 100% the most used resource I have on my bookshelf. Of all of the genealogy materials, books, publications, magazines, downloads, PDFs, whatever, podcasts, blogs, anything you want to reference, any kind of material that we use as guides, this is 100% the most valuable text I own. This is the one that I would like if my house was on fire, I would try to save this book. I could probably buy another copy, but I would
That was my thought. Joseph said it's the Bible of New York genealogy.
He's right. Absolutely right. It is. If you do nothing else after the session, if you have any New York research, you have to find a copy of this book. Most public libraries have it in their reference or genealogy collection. I don't think I've ever gone into a library anywhere in the United States that doesn't have a copy of this book. So it's a must-have. It's an absolute must-have.
Yeah.
And they're not paying me anything to say that, I promise. So we talk about our summer road trip series that we're doing, and we definitely want to make it that way. So we challenge you to think about, where would you go? What archives would you want to get into? Now, there are plenty of archives and libraries and museums across the state of New York that I would love to go to. But I picked a few just to share to get your creative juices flowing. And there's some that we kind of all think about, right? There's repositories right in New York City that everybody kind of goes, oh yeah, right? We all want to go to the New York Public Library, and it's a beautiful building, and their map collection alone is worth the visit. And the New York Historical Society is fabulous. I know Lisa's probably been to all these spots as well. She goes up to the city pretty frequently. The National Archives at New York City should absolutely not be missed. And of course, New York City Municipal Archives. But we also want to think about upstate and the rest of the New York's a big state, right? There's way more to it than just New York City. So think about the universities, right? Columbia and Cornell are right at the top of my list. I would love to go to the Holland Society of New York and peruse through their records. Fenimore Art Museum is formerly the New York State Historical Association, and they have an outstanding collection of historical records. And the Daniel A. Reed Library was on my list at Fredonia. And the reason for that is because they hold some of or most of, as far as I know, the largest collection of records for the most of the land settlements out in Western New York. So all of those all-important land organizations and companies, the Holland Land Company, et cetera, those original records are at the library at Fredonia.
I love that it's the Fenimore Art Museum. I mean, I know it was originally the New York State Historical Association, but I think it's very easy to overlook art museum and not put that at the top of your list of places to go. And so I love that it's there. And I would assume, I haven't delved into these too much, but like the university libraries and maybe the Holland Society might have digital collections online.
They do, yeah.
So if you can't get there, you might want to at least explore some of the digital collections that might be there as well.
Absolutely. And if nothing else, go to their website and find their card catalog and their research guides and their research aids or finding aids, and utilize those so that when you contact the archivist and say, hey, I'd like to have a copy of this record or what have you, you know exactly what you're talking about. There's a particular set of records. There's one book actually at Cornell that I've been after for a while that I can't get copies of because they've been shut down. The archive's been shut down for COVID. But there's one copy of a handwritten manuscript from a Methodist minister that traveled around the region where my ancestors were, I think, hanging out at the same time. And they were supposedly Methodist. And so I'm dying to know if this minister recorded, just on the off chance, recorded one of my people. Someday I will get to Cornell and pull that book and hold it in my hands, just because it's taken me so long to get access to it.
Hey, you could digitize
Even
it.
if they're not in there.
You could digitize it.
I would love to.
Yeah.
Trust me, I would love to. So think about that, right? And there's a number of different ways to identify archives and libraries and repositories around the country and around the world that we might want to explore. New York has a really great system in place. All the universities across New York are all connected into one website. So, do some Googling and find that so that you can find those research aids and those card catalogs, because it's invaluable. The material you can find on those websites is just enormous. It's outstanding.
Yeah. And don't forget to use Archive Grid too.
Yeah, Archive Grid, absolutely. As well. Yeah. Great. So let's talk a little bit about actual records, right, on Findmypast. We've spent now almost 40 minutes, believe it or not, talking just about the state itself. So I'm going to try and flip through this kind of as quickly as I can. We will talk about, of course, about the Catholic Project, but I also want to show you some of the other records that are available on Findmypast, including the New York Geological and Biographical Society e-library. We have a large partnership with the NYGMB, which we're very, very proud of, and we've been working with them for a number of years. So we're going to highlight a couple of their collections as well. So let's start with this one. This is the Immigrant Savings Bank registers. The Immigrant Savings Bank was actually designed specifically to help Irish immigrants in New York, whether they are using the bank as an individual or as a business or a corporate entity. So if you have Irish immigrants, and of course so many of our Irish ancestors came through the Port of New York and then stayed, this is a really, really important collection. Now they have their own website, so you can use this through Findmypast, or you can just go directly to the Immigrant Savings Bank Register's website. It's part of the New York Public Library system, and what we've done is actually just publish the index so that you can attach it to your tree and get that information kind of in a way that is a little easier for you as a genealogist. But we've also, so just the example in front of you is an individual named Patrick Bowman, who was taking out a loan of $7,000 back in 1888, right? And we have down here a link that says view the source image, and that takes you to that other website through the New York Public Library and gives you the actual image of his loan and mortgage document, right? So this is just a sample of what you can find, just so you get an understanding of what you're looking at. And again, most of these are actual business entities. They're not necessarily individual people, but just having the link to that original record so you can download that image or save it to, whatever system you prefer to use is really awesome.
That is an amazing collection.
Yeah, happen to be related to Patrick Bowman, just, he got that $7,000 loan and he was right off 43rd Street there, which is all kind of, that's all really cool to know, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. All right. So Catholic records, we are, of course, scanning the sacramental registers of the Archdiocese of New York. This is an ongoing project, so I'm just going to try to say this as quickly as possible. This is a long-term project we've been working on for a couple of years, and COVID hit us really hard. The campus was shut down, the archive was shut down, Findmypast shut down some of our operations as a result of the pandemic, and we are still in kind of this period of we're not really sure what is going to happen next. We're trying to be very, very careful. The archives of the Archdiocese are actually on a working campus for the Archdiocese. So there are people there that are going to school and attending school there. And as a result, we have been very cautious and trying to be very slow to bring our staff and our team back in out of respect, because they live there, right? And we don't want to be just bringing in random people and potentially spreading something that we don't want to spread. So this is a long, ongoing project, but please, we're asking for your patience on this. We know that there are a lot of people who are really anxious to get their hands on these records, and we're publishing as fast as we can, but understand we're now at least 2 years behind schedule. Which I don't like saying out loud, but that's the truth. So, so in the last few months, what we've done is actually published a number of registers from a variety of parishes without indexing them, because the other piece of this is that most of our records are indexed by partners overseas, specifically in India. And as we all know, India has been incredibly hard hit. And so they have also slowed down as a result of the pandemic. So we're publishing at least the images, so you can go in and kind of browse it like you would microfilm and go, okay, I can at least find my parish if it's available to do so with. And as you can see from the example in front of you, we are now starting to publish the images that we've been capturing in color. A vast majority of the collection so far has been from microfilm, so it's all black and white, but we're now starting to be able to produce the images that we've been capturing on site for the first time. So there's some really, really exciting records available on Findmypast that have never really been seen before by anybody in the public. And they're available to us in color, which is so great.
That is good. And there's something valuable in browse only type of databases, because I find this when I've done census work, but when you read page by page, that community, and then you can you'll be amazed at just kind of what you absorb as you're going through it. And you recognize names, and the next time you go to the next year or the next record set, and you're like, okay, yeah, this is not my group of people. I need this group of people. You just start to recognize and understand the community better.
Yeah, so, absolutely. Yeah. I couldn't agree more, Lisa. Yeah, there's, and even when there is a name search available on record sets, I typically do both, just to make sure that I'm investing as much knowledge as I can and understanding as much as I can about a particular record set at any given time. So yeah. So just to kind of quickly for everybody's reference, if you're not familiar with the Archdiocese of New York, one of the questions we get the most is, when are you going to publish records from Albany, or when are you going to put out records from Syracuse? Well, they're all different archdioceses, actually. So we currently are working with the Archdiocese of New York, and only that. So that's the red section on the map here. So it covers the boroughs of Manhattan, the Bronx, Staten Island, in New York City, and then the counties of Dutchess, Orange, Putnam, Rockland, Sullivan, Ulster, and Westchester, but nowhere's else. So that's it for right now. The Archdiocese of New York just covers those territories. And we are publishing and scanning and indexing all of the Sacramento registers up to the 100-year privacy limit from that archdiocese. But again, it's just going to take quite a bit longer, unfortunately, than we anticipated because of the pandemic. So hopefully that answers people's questions. But if you have other questions about the Catholic Project, please do send them in, because I get those a lot and I'm pretty used to it. But it's good. I'm excited to see the energy and everybody's really anxious for those records. That's a good thing.
Yeah.
So I mentioned our partnership with the New York Geological and Biographical Society. I'll try to again flip through these pretty quickly, but we have published their e-library. So that includes the Record, which is one of the longest running geological publications in the United States, the New York Researcher, which I'll show you, and then a number of other collections. So their digital books, their family files, their society member biographies, right? Because at one point they acted more like a lineage society, and you kind of had to prove your eligibility to join the GNB. So they have these great biographies. Family Bible collection, all sorts of wonderful stuff held at that particular organization. So a couple of those, we'll start with the New York State Religious Records. This is by and large one of the most important collections I think that we have for New York on Findmypast. And the reason for that is because it really indexes and surveys many of those very early vital records that we've been talking about and telling you how important they are for New York research. Well, a lot of them can be found in this format on Findmypast or on the NYGMB website. So the example in front of you is from the Protestant Presbyterian Congregation of Cambridge in Washington County for 1916. And the pages is listed that it was published in 1916, but as you can see, the transcriptions go all the way back to the early 1840s. So really, really essential record set for New York State. And I happen to know that the GMB is working on some really cool projects for religious records as well. So this is a really important area for genealogical research in New York, and those religious records are really valuable. So take some time with those, because they're good ones.
So Elizabeth was asking, when it came to religious records, is there somewhere on the website and that shows the names of New York City churches and the years that have been covered for digitization?
That kind of leads me to think she's asking about the Catholic collection, but for the state as a whole, no, Findmypast doesn't have a resource like that. The Gazetteer that we mentioned earlier as a reference book has some of that information. And the New York GNB would have some of those, and then local societies would have lists like that. The Catholic, just speaking to the Catholic piece in particular, the Archdiocese of New York website has a really wonderful parish finder type of tool on their website that talks about the history of each parish and congregation, when it started, what language they speak, if it merged into another parish, where the records went, etc. So those kinds of resources are available, but Findmypast doesn't really have a statewide database in that regard.
Okay, yeah, she did specify the New York City Catholic record. She was wondering, if Findmypast had listed that out. But
yeah. So we do have a list on Findmypast of the parishes that we have published, but there is nothing that says these are all the parishes and when they opened, and they're predominantly German or something like that, or predominantly Mexicans, Spanish speaking or anything like that. However, the archives does have that list. I believe it's on their website. If not, you can email them and ask. But they do have a master list of kind of all of their parishes.
Yes, and I've used that as well.
Yeah, it's a good one. Yeah. Okay, so then a couple other examples from our collection from the NYGMB includes these marriage index cards. They're referred to as the Force-Vorsk collection, and they are almost all related to the Force and Vorse families. But what I think is interesting, and this is a really good example of how these things work, right? These were probably created by one of the state's most reputable genealogists, and he was incredibly detailed and incredibly thorough, as you can see from his index card there. But he documented all families related to these surnames. So what you end up getting is this wonderful collection of people. Like this one is Asa Douglas, and you can see they're kind of all over New York, right? In Copenhagen and Rochester. But you also end up with other related surnames like Babcock, right? Daughter of Charles and Jeanette Cross Babcock. So you get this whole family relationship. And then you also get these little snippets that are from really all over the United States. So this card is Ray George. And, he ends up in Wisconsin, in Los Angeles, and Iowa, and marries a Jenny Baldwin from Iowa. No relation as far as I'm aware. So even though this collection says it's the Force-Vorse family, you really need to look at these materials, right? Don't let the title of a collection kind of dissuade you from saying, that's not relevant, because it really might be. You just never know what you're going to find in some of these little gems, especially these things that are collected and curated by societies, because they have real value to researchers kind of really across the state and across the country.
Yeah,
it's not a very big collection, but yeah. Sorry, Lisa, I cut you off.
Oh, I was just saying, I love those little small collections like that, because they really can be gems. And 90% of the time, they probably won't have my ancestor, but that one time they do.
Right.
Give me I'll be happy to answer people.
Well, and that's the fun part about research, right? Is you don't know what you're going to discover until you're there, and the journey is the fun part. Yeah, I don't have to convince all of us of that. And then one other that I wanted to feature today, because we're going to talk about some of these other pieces, I think, next week, but the researcher is available on Findmypast. And this is the magazine, essentially, of the GMB. At one time, it was kind of their newsletter, right? Like any other society would have. It's gone through a couple of different iterations, but it's currently now kind of a magazine. I think it's quarterly, if I remember right. And all sorts of wonderful information about researching particular counties. And it's just part of your, or different types of records, like this particular article about case files. It's just a really great way to continue to learn about New York research. And at one time, it was their newsletter. And so people would send in queries, just like any other Genealogy Society newsletter, right? So the older you go back in the collection, the more queries you find. So I have struck gold before with these types of queries. I just pulled one as an example for Leander Brown, right? Someone's looking for them. And this one, I think, was from like the 1980s. So the odds of me connecting with this person are probably pretty slim at this point, but I have this little tidbit of information, and I know that someone was doing research on this family. And so I can now turn to other sources, right? Like public trees, right? And I can look at the Findmypast tree and go, are there any hints that are leading me towards my New York ancestors from tree to tree and that kind of thing? So you start to kind of connect these dots, and, don't overlook these types of materials, right? Like newsletters and periodicals.
That's a great find.
Yeah, it is a good one. All right, so let's go beyond the state lines and look at a few of our other hidden gems. And Lisa actually already started us out with a great story from the Passengers Leaving the UK set, but we're gonna showcase a couple others as well. There's one on this list that I didn't include an example of, and that's the Philadelphia Roman Catholic newspapers. We'll cover that when we get to Pennsylvania, when we get down to Philadelphia. But I mention it here because Catholic newspapers publish news about Catholics from all over the world. So even if it's a Philadelphia newspaper, it's kind of like what we were talking about with the Force-Vorse index cards. Don't let the title keep you from researching in that particular collection, because you may come across something that's really, really valuable.
Yeah, definitely.
All right, so as quickly as we can, because I know we're running out of time. Passages leaving UK, we touched a bit on this in Lisa's story. It spans from 1890 to 1960, and one of the reasons this set is particularly so valuable, Liverpool was one of the largest ports in the world at this time, and it was, as far as I recall, the largest for passenger ships at this point. So, I have ancestors that migrated from they basically walked from southern Russia to the Black Sea, got on a boat, went over to England, walked across England, got on another boat in Liverpool, and traveled to Canada. So you can almost always find some document, some piece of that journey moving through the British ports during this period, or the UK ports. So out of this collection, it's a significant collection. It's very large. There are over 8.6 million entries just going into the port of New York alone. So if you have anybody traveling from anywhere in the world during this time frame, from 1890 to 1960, you want to give these passenger lists a try. So of course, that covers a really crucial period of immigration into the United States. And New York, of course, was the largest port, and Liverpool was the largest port. And so those two things really come together nicely.
Yep.
The other thing that we've done with this record set that I am really excited about, and I don't think enough people know about it yet, when you go in and you find someone, so, I found this record of Helena Tober. When I go in and look at her transcription, right, which is what you see to the left of the screen with her name, this one is a different example, right? Smith, female, very vague. One of the things that we've done is actually given you a couple of new tools. So you can look at all the people on that boat of the same last name. So if you have someone who has an unusual spelling, like I have ancestors whose last name was Bohemius, and it is spelled 1,000 different ways, right? And on the same passenger list, it's actually, there are 3 families traveling together, and it's spelled differently every time. So you can see all the people on that voyage with the same name, or you can just go directly to the boat itself and see everybody who's listed on that voyage. So if you click on this little button that says see who they are there, you will get a list of everybody who was on that particular voyage, that boat, that date. They departed all together. They were all traveling together, no matter how they were related to each other, if they were at all, right? So if you're looking for, and you're suspicious that maybe someone traveled with someone that eventually married into the family, or was a cousin or something, this is one of the easiest ways to do that. Is just by looking by boat instead of name by name.
That makes sense. And looking at those, who was on that boat, you're right. This is one of those, I would probably read the entire ship manifest to see
Right.
who was there, because I'm going to see if they're still together when they got to America.
Yep, exactly. So it's a really, really great tool. So take advantage of that. It's just one of the features that we've added in particular to that passenger list leaving the UK record set, just to make it just a little bit easier for all of you guys out there to find and make those connections.
Somebody was asking about well, this might be it. That might actually.
Okay.
What about people who left England before 1890?
Right.
Yes.
She's just one slide ahead of us. So there are a couple of collections that do cover departure out of the UK in the earlier periods. One of those is early immigration from Britain, 1636 to 1815. And noticeably, there is a gap between kind of 1815, 1820, and that later period of 1890. There weren't a lot of records created on the departure side during that kind of the majority of the 1800s. So if you fit in between 1820 to 1890, unfortunately, you're looking at the arrival list. There's not as many departure lists, but there are some of these early records that do exist. So early immigration from Britain's one of them. And of course, in this particular collection, the travel to America is largely pre-Revolutionary War. And you have to remember that these collections are not about the United States, right? They were created in England, and it's everybody leaving England, no matter where they were headed. So they could have been going to Europe, they could have been going to the Middle East, they could have been going to Asia, Australia, certainly the Americas. So you're really looking at immigration just leaving Britain, period. The destination wasn't really that important, at least from the record keeping sense. But these records are incredible. Most of them do include their former residents. at least a name of a town or a village, if not more specific, a destination port, the vessel they traveled on, and their reason for travel. It often includes family relationships and sometimes will include religion, even. So, depending on who took the record and how it was formatted and when it was created, this particular example in front of you is from 1774, so it's a little earlier. But all these people are headed for New York, and so they're really fabulous records. The other piece about these that I really like, this is one more example. There are a number of these, and I haven't been able to identify them all, though I'm working on it, that labeled the indentured servants that came over from the UK. And that is very difficult to find and very unique in this kind of record format. So this particular example is from 1775, and everybody that's on this page is headed for New York, and they're all indentured servants. And that's rare. That's very, very rare to find that information.
Definitely. Yeah.
Yeah.
And
So,
I wanted to just point out, kind of reiterate what you said, that these are records, this one, and of course the previous slide, of people leaving the UK. It is not about America, and we have to remember that the reason for the record and who created it and why and what was their purpose.
Right. Yep. Exactly. Okay, so then another option for that kind of early period that really helps with New York research is the Early American Vital Records collection. And again, this is one where the title could be misleading. This is actually a collection of a number of publications that we kind of put all in one thing so you could search them all at one time. So the example in front of you is actually from a publication entitled Third Supplement to Tories' New England Marriages Prior to 1700. And you see that and you go, oh, New England, well, that's not New York. Well, at one time, New York was considered part of New England, and that was a viewpoint from a lot of different people. And so you kind of have this mix of records from New England and New York kind of hovers out on the edge. But as you can see through here, you have a number of records that include people whose vital records are documented in a publication like this out of New York. One of the other really important things is this is a transcription, right? This is someone sitting down and collecting records from the period that they're interested in, marriages prior to 1700, and they're putting them in one place. And so they are all referencing some other original document. That's the GM 1364. So go to the front of the book, understand what that GM stands for, and always, always, always try to go to the original source and find that original record so you can see for yourself if the transcription is actually correct and if there's more information there for you. Okay, another one that you might not think about is the Australia Inward, Outward, and Coastal Passenger List from 1826 to 1972. This particular snippet is from Victoria. Again, this is a collection that we've pulled a number of references together and made it kind of one big set so that you can search it all at once. So these are passengers arriving on the Oregon in 1853, and they are all arriving into New York. And one of the things that I actually love about this collection is that most of them are not Australian, right? You see, I know you can't see the tops of the columns here, but place of origin is Canada, England, United States, USA, Scotland. And then, that gentleman down at the bottom who actually was from Scotland, he's eventually going to Canada, but he's traveling into the port of New York to get there. So these can be really valuable records and kind of connecting all those dots as well.
That's interesting. And I wouldn't have thought of that one either.
I'll admit I asked a colleague on this one. I did. I cheated a little bit, but New York was it was the place, right, in terms of Eastern immigration and coming in. If you wanted to come into the United States, you kind of either came in through New York or, the West Coast somewhere for a big period of time. So it kind of makes sense that international travel happens, in our ancestors' lives just as much as it happens today. And then this one is, I'm going to finish with this one. This is one of my personal favorites of all the materials we have on Findmypast. This one just really touches me. So this is a U.S. serviceman in North Devon, England, from 1943 to 45. And of course, we all know that's the period of World War II. And so this is a register book, actually, from a service club for the American Red Cross that was nearby, very nearby, the base where they were doing all the training for the D-Day landings on all the beaches. And so these are guys who were stationed there. They were Americans. They were stationed in England. They were doing their training, and they were going to the service club for a couple pints and some music and some dancing, whatever, right? This was their social life. But every time they walked in the door, they had to sign in. And this particular register is held at a local museum in Devon, and they gave us the opportunity to scan it and transcribe it and make it available to the public. In most cases, the prevailing theory is that most of these men did not survive the D-Day events. And so in most cases, it's going to be one of the last times that you're going to find their signature, their writing, and it's just a really, really important and touching piece of American history. It actually covers every state. It's a full national register. We just happen to use it as part of the New York examples today. But you can see on that page that's blown up, there's individuals from Buffalo, Yonkers, Kingston, Long Island, New York City, the Bronx. So it's a real collection. It's a real valuable and important, to me, historical collection of individuals that may or may not have made it home from that very, very important series of events. I get a little choked up every time I talk about it.
I was like, that's an incredible record set that you guys have, and just
yeah, it takes a second, doesn't it? Right?
Yeah, it does.
Sit with that for a minute, and not to end on too heavy of a note, but it is one that is worth knowing about, and certainly sharing. So just these are important stories, right? So just to kind of summarize it all for you today, right? There's a lot of research to be done in New York. If you need help, you can reach out to Findmypast. You can absolutely reach out to Lisa as well. And we have another live stream next week to talk even more about New York. And we're really, really excited to have a very special guest. Josh Taylor, president of the New York Geological and Biographical Society, is going to be joining us on a live stream next week to talk even more about New York research.
Yeah, I'm super excited to have Josh join us next week. So that'll be really exciting. You definitely want to see that.
Yeah,
and
for sure.
Yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say, get your questions ready and feel free to ask them in advance so that we can kind of prep and address any kind of specific questions. We're happy to just maybe do just a big old Q&A, but we will have some kind of organized talking points as well.
That sounds good. Yeah. And you can always pop over to my site at lisalisten.com. I have the latest blog post is about the New York ancestors. It's really just lisalisten.com/new-york-ancestors.
Yep.
So it's easy to find. Yeah. Jim, we had a couple questions. I know we're a little over. Do you want to take
I've got time. Yeah,
that'd be great. So we had a question about what about people who left so we did that one. Hang on. What about the synagogues that closed? Where can we find their records? So like synagogues out in New York that closed, where might we find those records? That's a tough one, guys, because I've struggled with that one as well. Do you have a great maybe we'll ask
that's what I was going to say. I do not have a lot of experience in Jewish records. So I think that is a great one, Bridget, for Josh next week. So we will put that on the list for him. And hopefully you can join us again. If not, these sessions are always recorded and you can play them back at your convenience. But we will make sure to hit that up with Josh next week.
Yeah, I agree. Let's see. Joseph wanted to know if you have specific record sets relating to enslaved people or free people of color in New York or elsewhere.
So great question, Joseph. Findmypast is really focused on making the bridge from our American ancestors to the British and Irish ancestors as easy to cross as possible. And so because of that, the records of the enslaved have not been a focus area for us very much. However, in the last couple of months, we've been doing quite a bit more research on the loyalist community, and that includes a number of individuals who were previously enslaved, and either traveled to Canada or into London or all the way around to Sierra Leone during that American Revolution period. So we've published some of those types of materials, but admittedly, we have a long, long ways to go when it comes to other records of the enslaved or free people of color. I will note that some of the Catholic records include that population. And we'll actually talk about this when we get to Baltimore in our road trip. Baltimore is very unique in that they actually document enslaved, mulatto, free blacks and such inside the Sacramento registers in a way that's not seen in some of the other cities and other locations. So a long-winded response, Joseph, and I'm sorry for the long answer, but something we're working on, something I'm actively engaged in. I mean, I will tell you, on Friday we're releasing a new record set having to do with Black loyalists in Nova Scotia. So we're actively doing this, but they're small collections, admittedly, and a very narrow focus. So not something that we're terribly good at yet. There was one that we published from the American Revolution period, and it's the I believe it's entitled "The Book of Negroes." And that's available as of just the last couple months on Findmypast as well.
That sounds good. Yeah, I wanted to thank Christine. She answers a couple of the questions in there with a link from your podcast, as well as some of the
fabulous.
I was asking.
Thank you.
So, and Lori was asking about, would I mention again the info on shoemakers? Your great-great-grandfather came from Ireland to Montreal to Buffalo to Chicago, was a shoemaker. Yeah, I didn't really, just kind of more of a note that was part of because that was the occupation of the gentleman that I was researching, and connecting him back to other family members. I knew there were at least 2 generations of shoemakers. And so when I started finding them in the same location with other bootmakers, shoemakers, with other people maybe who worked the leather, then I knew I was in the right community and felt like, they must have known each other. And it just was another way to tie the families together. It's certainly not alone did it do it, but it definitely was just one more piece and one more clue that kind of tied things together. So I don't have any specific. I pulled that from the census records, or how I knew that the individuals were in the shoemaking trade. So yeah.
It's interesting and kind of funny. I also have a shoemaker that immigrated from England into New York.
Didn't know that. That's interesting. And I have
maybe it's a thing.
Well, I have a shoemaker in the family too, but in North Carolina. But yeah, he had nothing to do with coming into New York or any of that.
I did want to. I noticed this comment from Bridget, and thank you, Bridget, for bringing this up. The NYGMB membership, it does include a subscription to Findmypast. So it's part of our ongoing partnership. If you are a member of the NYGMB, you did get free access to the United States records on Findmypast. You don't get access to British and Irish and Scottish and all the other exciting records that we have, but you get a really, really significant discount if you wanted to purchase access or purchase a subscription. But if you are a member of the NYGMB and you do not yet have access to the Findmypast website, go to the NYGMB site, log in, and look for that information. But it's important you go to the NYGMB website first and connect into Findmypast through them, so that our system knows that you're coming in from the GMB and you're a member. So thank you, Bridget, for raising that for the group. And it's always appreciated. It is a really, really great benefit to have that, because it does include things like the Catholic records for New York. And that's a substantial record set. So.
Yeah, and Bridget was also indicating that the birth of colored and enslaved are in the Church of England records in Westchester.
Yep. I was going to put that up. And you read my mind. Thank you. Yeah. So that's another fantastic research opportunity. Thank you, Bridget, for that.
I don't know about you, Jim, but when we get done with these, I'm always like, I got to go research now.
Yeah.
I saw that record set. I need to go check for so-and-so in that particular record set. It's just, 100%. My brain goes into overdrive for genealogy.
Yeah, so bearing that in mind, we need to move these away from Tuesdays, because in 45 minutes I have to leave to take my daughter to ballet, and that's not enough time. So
yeah, well, make a list. At least the ancestors aren't going anywhere, right?
Well, that's true. Yeah.
So anyway, I don't see more questions. So thank you, everybody, for joining us today. Like I said, next week, as Jen said, Josh Taylor will be here with us. Same time, Tuesday. No, it's actually Monday, the 26th.
It is. It's Monday, not
Monday the
Tuesday.
26th, not Tuesday, but Monday the 26th at 4 p.m. Eastern time. I'll let you guys do the calculations for where you live. And we'll be talking more about New York City because there is just so much to do and so much to talk about there.
Yep, absolutely. And Josh is one of the best. So I'm really excited to have him on. So like I said, send in your questions, get them to us early on either the Find My Past Facebook page or Lisa's page and her blog. So connect with either one of us, however you prefer, and we'll get those questions over and we'll have a great discussion on Monday. So thank you all very much for joining, and we'll see you next time.
Bye, guys.